My daughter-in-law spent my cancer treatment money on her wedding. We only get married once in a lifetime. I had to beat cancer on my own. When the big day arrived, the guests were in shock when I simply, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought my own son would choose his wife's wedding dress over my life. The letter from Dr. Morrison arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, crisp and clinical in its delivery of devastating news. Stage 2 breast cancer. Aggressive treatment required immediately. The words blurred together as I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed David breakfast every morning for 18 years before he left for college. "The estimated cost for your treatment plan will be approximately $15,000, Dr. Morrison had explained during our follow-up appointment. "I know it's substantial, Geneva, but we need to move quickly. I had that money. I'd been saving it for years in a separate account, money from my late husband's life insurance that I'd carefully set aside for emergencies. This certainly qualified as an emergency. "Don't worry," I told David when I called him that evening. "I have the money saved. We can start treatment next week." My son's voice had sounded strained, distant. "That's great, Mom. Really great. I'm sure everything will work out fine." Everything was not working out fine. 3 weeks later, I was standing in my bank, staring at a balance of $347.22 in an account that should have contained $15,347.22. The teller, a young woman with sympathetic eyes, pulled up my transaction history with careful clicks of her keyboard. "It looks like there was a large withdrawal 3 weeks ago," she said softly. "The authorized person on the account made the transfer." Authorized person. I'd added David to that account years ago, when his father passed away, just in case something happened to me. I never imagined he would use it without telling me. My hands shook as I drove home, the bank statements clutched in my passenger seat like evidence of a crime, which, in a way, they were. I found David in my living room when I got home, sitting on the couch with Milani curled up beside him. They were looking at wedding invitations, ivory cardstock scattered across my coffee table like autumn leaves. "Mom!" David stood up quickly, his face flushing. "I didn't know you'd be back so soon." Oh, Milani looked up from the invitations, her perfectly manicured fingers still holding a gold-embossed sample. "Hi, Geneva. We were just finalizing the guest list." I set my purse down carefully, my heart hammering against my ribs. "David, I need to talk to you. Alone." "Actually, Mom, Milani and I don't keep secrets from each other. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of her." I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman I'd welcomed into our family 18 months ago. She was beautiful, I'd give her that. Glossy black hair, green eyes that seemed to sparkle with perpetual amusement, and a smile that could charm anyone, including my son. "The money's gone," I said simply. David's face went white. Milani's expression didn't change at all. "What money?" he asked, though we both knew exactly what money. I pulled out the bank statements, my fingers trembling as I unfolded them. $15,000 from my medical account, the money I need for my cancer treatment. The silence in the room was suffocating. David looked from me to Milani, then back to me again. "Mom, I can explain." "Please do." Milani shifted on the couch, crossing her legs elegantly. "Geneva, we borrowed the money, temporarily, for the wedding." "Borrowed?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I'm supposed to start chemotherapy next week." "And you will," David said quickly, jumping to his feet. "We'll figure something out. You'll find a way. But Mom, Milani only gets to have one wedding. This is her dream day." I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, who'd supposedly inherited his father's sense of responsibility and honor. "Find a way? David? This is cancer, not a vacation I can postpone." "You're being dramatic," Milani said, her voice light and casual. "People beat cancer all the time. And honestly, Geneva, you've lived your life. This is my time now." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, my hand reaching for the wall to steady myself. "Milani?" David said sharply, but not sharp enough. Not nearly sharp enough for what she'd just said to his mother. "What? I'm just being honest. She's 63, David. I'm 26. Who deserves this money more? I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me. Waiting for him to tell his wife that she was out of line, that no amount of money was worth more than his mother's life. Instead, he ran his hands through his hair and sighed. Mom, look, I know this isn't ideal, but the deposits are already paid. The venue, the catering, Milani's dress. We can't get that money back now. So you spent my cancer treatment money on a party. It's not a party, Milani snapped. It's our wedding, the most important day of our lives. I felt something inside me break. Not my heart, exactly. Something deeper. Something that had been holding me together for the past 26 years since David's father died. Get out, I said quietly. Mom! Both of you, get out of my house. David's face crumpled. Mom, please, we can work this out. There has to be another way to pay for your treatment. There was a way. $15,000 worth of a way. And you gave it to her for flowers and cake. I walked to my front door and opened it wide. The spring air rushed in, carrying the scent of the jasmine bush my husband had planted 30 years ago. I said, get out. They left, but not before Milani grabbed the wedding invitations from my coffee table. These are expensive, she muttered, as if I might steal them. After they drove away, I sat in my empty house and stared at the bank statements until the numbers blurred together. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear my neighbor's dog barking, the sound of normal life continuing around me while mine fell apart. I had cancer, I had no money for treatment, and I had a son who'd chosen wedding flowers over his mother's life. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something else began to grow alongside my despair. Something cold and determined and surprisingly strong. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd just disappear quietly, maybe die conveniently before the wedding so they wouldn't have to deal with the guilt. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The hardest part wasn't losing my hair. It was losing my illusions about my own son. Dr. Morrison's office felt different when you were paying out of pocket. The receptionist's smile seemed a little less warm when I had to negotiate payment plans. The waiting room magazines felt older. The coffee tasted more bitter. We can start with a less aggressive treatment protocol, Dr. Morrison explained, his kind eyes heavy with concern. It won't be as effective, but it's more affordable. I sat in his office, wearing the same dress I'd worn to David's high school graduation. I'd sold most of my jewelry to the pawn shop on Elm Street, including my wedding ring. The man behind the counter had weighed it carefully, like he was measuring my desperation. How much less effective? I asked. Geneva, I have to be honest with you. This cancer is aggressive. Without proper treatment. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I sold my car next. It was a 2018 Honda that David's father would have loved, reliable and practical. The buyer, a young couple with a baby, counted out cash in my driveway while I watched from my kitchen window. They looked so happy, so hopeful about their purchase. I started taking the bus to my treatments. The first day of chemotherapy, I sat in the infusion center surrounded by other patients, most of them with family members holding their hands, bringing them blankets, staying for the long hours while poison dripped into our veins to save our lives. Is someone coming to pick you up? Asked Rita, the nurse who'd been assigned to me. She was probably my age, with silver hair and kind hands that had clearly comforted thousands of scared patients. I'll take the bus, I said. Honey, after your first treatment, you're going to feel awful. You really shouldn't be alone. I wanted to tell her that I hadn't been alone until 3 weeks ago, that I'd had a son who I thought would move mountains for me. Instead, I just nodded and said I'd call a taxi if I needed one. David called twice during those first weeks. Both times he asked about my treatment, and both times I could hear Milani in the background talking about wedding preparations. How's everything going, Mom? He'd ask, his voice careful and distant. I'm managing, I'd tell him. Good, that's great. Listen, I was wondering if you'd given any more thought to the guest list. Milani really wants to include some of her sorority sisters, but we're running up against the venue limit. The guest list for the wedding that was being paid for with my cancer treatment money. I haven't thought about it, I said. Well, could you? It's just that we need to finalize numbers for the caterer. After the third call like this, I stopped answering. The wedding preparations continued around me like a storm I wasn't invited into. I'd see Milani at the grocery store, radiant and glowing, pushing a cart full of expensive items while she talked loudly on her phone about venue decorations. She'd wave at me with that same brilliant smile, as if we were just casual acquaintances who'd run into each other. "Geneva? How are you feeling? You look a little pale." I was pale. The chemotherapy was working, but it was also destroying everything else in its path. I'd lost 20 pounds and most of my hair. I wore scarves now, carefully wrapped to hide the evidence of what I was going through. "I'm fine," I'd tell her. "That's wonderful. You know, David and I were just saying how strong you are. We're so proud of how you're handling everything." Handling everything. As if my cancer was just another household chore I needed to manage efficiently. The worst part came 6 weeks into my treatment. I was sitting in the infusion center trying to read a book while the IV dripped into my arm, when I overheard Milani talking to someone on her phone in the waiting area. "Oh, it's been so stressful," she was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who enjoys being the center of attention. "David's mother is going through some health issues, and she's been so demanding about everything. She keeps trying to make the wedding about her, you know?" I couldn't see her from where I was sitting, but I could picture her perfectly, probably twirling her hair around her finger, the way she did when she was performing for an audience. No, she's fine. Just some minor medical stuff, but she's been so difficult about the wedding planning. She actually got upset when we used some money she'd saved, like we're not family or something. Some money she'd saved. Minor medical stuff. I know, right? Like, hello, this is my wedding. The most important day of my life. She's had 63 years to live her dreams. Now it's my turn. Rita, my nurse, appeared beside my chair. "You okay, honey? You look like you're about to be sick." "I'm fine," I whispered. But I wasn't fine. I was something else entirely. Something harder and colder than I'd ever been before. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done in my 63 years of life. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb, and his office was above a dry cleaner in the old part of town. He was probably 50, with graying hair and the kind of face that you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. Perfect for his job. "I want you to look into someone," I told him, sliding a check across his desk. It was money from selling my grandmother's china set, every piece lovingly collected over decades. "Who?" "My daughter-in-law, Milani Roberts, soon to be Milani Hartford." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of information are you looking for?" I thought about that phone call, about her casual dismissal of my cancer as minor medical stuff, about the way she'd looked at me like I was an inconvenient obstacle to her happiness. "Everything," I said. "I want to know everything." He nodded, making notes in a small leather notebook. "This might take some time." "I have time," I said. "About 6 months of it." That was how long Dr. Morrison had given me with the reduced treatment plan. 6 months to live, if I was lucky. But as I walked out of Marcus Webb's office that day, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't planning to spend those 6 months dying quietly. I was planning to spend them learning the truth. And when I found it, I was going to make sure everyone else learned it too. Starting with my son. The truth arrived on a Thursday, delivered in a manila envelope that felt heavier than its contents should have. I was sitting in Dr. Morrison's waiting room for my weekly blood work when a familiar face caught my attention. The woman at the reception desk was about my age, with steel gray hair and the kind of competent demeanor that comes from years in the medical field. "Geneva. Geneva Hartford?" I looked up from my magazine, surprised to hear my name. The woman was walking toward me with a cautious smile. "I'm sorry. I don't think we've met," I said. "Nancy Rodriguez. I'm a nurse at Memorial Hospital downtown. I think I know your daughter-in-law." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Milani?" Nancy glanced around the waiting room, then leaned closer. "Could we talk privately? Maybe grab coffee after your appointment?" An hour later, we sat in a small cafe 2 blocks from the medical center. Nancy stirred her coffee nervously, clearly struggling with whatever she wanted to tell me. "I probably shouldn't be doing this," she said finally. "But when I saw you in there, wearing that scarf, looking so thin, I had to say something." "What about Milani?" Nancy took a deep breath. "About 3 years ago, we had a patient at Memorial, young man named Trevor Collins, brain tumor, very aggressive. He needed expensive treatment, experimental procedures." I set down my coffee cup, my hands starting to shake. Trevor was married to a beautiful young woman, black hair, green eyes, went by Michelle Collins then, but I'd recognize that face anywhere. It was your Milani. The cafe seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. Milani's never been married before. Nancy shook her head sadly. She was married to Trevor for 8 months, right up until his family's insurance money and savings ran out. Then she filed for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences. What happened to Trevor? He died 6 weeks later, alone. His family had spent everything trying to save him, and when the money was gone, so was his wife. I felt sick, not the chemotherapy kind of sick, but something deeper and more poisonous. Are you sure it was her? Nancy pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like a social media page. I kept track of the family after Trevor died. They posted some wedding photos. She turned the screen toward me. There was Milani, radiant in a white dress, standing next to a thin young man with kind eyes and a baseball cap covering his bald head. They looked happy, in love. The caption read, "My beautiful bride Michelle on our wedding day, fighting cancer together." She told David she'd never been married. I whispered, "There's more." Nancy's voice was gentle but firm. After Trevor died, I heard she moved to Phoenix, got involved with another man, also wealthy, also sick. Pattern repeated itself. I stared at the photo until it blurred. How many times? I don't know for sure. But Geneva, you need to tell your son. I thought about David, so happy with his beautiful fiancée, so convinced that I was the problem in their relationship. How could I explain this without sounding like a jealous mother-in-law? He won't believe me. Then get proof. That evening, I called Marcus Webb. I need everything, I told him. Marriage records, divorce papers, financial records, everything you can find. Mrs. Hartford, this kind of investigation takes time and money. I looked around my house, taking inventory of what I could sell next. How much money? For a thorough background check, including financial records and marriage history across multiple states. About $5,000. That was more than I had left after paying for my treatments. But I thought about Trevor Collins, dying alone while his wife moved on to her next victim. I thought about David, trusting and naive, walking into the same trap. I'll get you the money. The next morning, I went to my jewelry box and pulled out the last valuable thing I owned, my mother's diamond necklace. She'd given it to me on my wedding day, 40 years ago, with instructions to pass it down to my daughter-in-law someday. The pawnshop owner examined it carefully under his magnifying glass. It's beautiful work. I can give you $6,500 for it. Deal. Marcus Webb called me 5 days later. You're going to want to see this in person. His office felt smaller this time, cramped and stuffy. He spread documents across his desk like he was laying out a poker hand. Milani Roberts has been married 4 times, he said without preamble. First marriage was when she was 21, to a man named Bradley Thompson. He had testicular cancer stage 3. Marriage lasted 6 months until his treatment money ran out. He slid a divorce decree across the desk. I recognized Milani's signature at the bottom. Second marriage was to Trevor Collins, like your nurse friend mentioned. Third was to a man in Phoenix named Robert Martinez. Lung cancer, very wealthy family. She cleaned out his accounts before he died. And the fourth? A widower in Denver named Frank Morrison. No relation to your doctor, just coincidence. Frank had prostate cancer and a substantial life insurance policy. Milani was with him for almost a year before he got suspicious and hired his own investigator. Marcus pulled out another set of papers. Frank's still alive. His investigator found evidence that Milani was slowly poisoning him with his own medication, increasing doses to accelerate his decline. The room spun around me. Poisoning? She never got charged. Frank recovered when he cut contact with her, and she disappeared before police could build a case. But the medical records don't lie. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. Marriage certificates, divorce papers, medical records, financial statements. A pattern of predatory behavior stretching back 7 years. Mr. Webb, what does this mean for my son? Mrs. Hartford, your son is in serious danger. This woman doesn't just steal money, she eliminates obstacles. I thought about David, healthy and trusting, with a substantial inheritance from his father's estate. I thought about me, sick and vulnerable, standing between Milani and a comfortable widow's life. I need copies of everything. What are you planning to do? I gathered the papers carefully, my mind already working through the possibilities. I'm going to save my son's life. And your own? I looked at Marcus Webb, this stranger who'd just handed me the ammunition I needed to destroy my son's marriage and possibly save his life. Maybe that too. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with copies of every document Marcus had provided. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Milani Roberts was a predator who specialized in marrying sick or vulnerable men, stealing their money, and moving on. Sometimes she waited for them to die naturally. Sometimes, apparently, she helped the process along. I thought about calling David immediately, demanding he meet me, shoving the papers in his face until he had to acknowledge the truth. But I knew my son. He was stubborn like his father, loyal to a fault. If I came at him with accusations and evidence, he'd dismiss it as a desperate attempt to break up his marriage. He'd choose Milani over me, just like he'd already done once. No, this required a different approach, something subtler, more strategic. I looked at my calendar. The wedding was in 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks to figure out how to expose Milani without destroying my relationship with David forever. 6 weeks to save my son from a woman who might very well kill him. And I was going to do it at her own wedding, in front of everyone she'd tried so hard to impress. Let her have her dream day. I'd make sure it was memorable for all the right reasons. David's face turned white when I showed him the photographs. We were sitting in his apartment, the same place where he'd brought Milani to meet me for the first time 18 months ago. Back then, I'd been charmed by her smile, impressed by her attentiveness to my son. I'd actually thought he'd found someone special. Now I knew exactly how special she was. "This can't be right," David said, his hands shaking as he held the marriage certificate from Milani's wedding to Trevor Collins. "Mom, where did you get this?" "Does it matter where I got it? What matters is that it's real." I'd spent 3 days planning this conversation, deciding exactly which documents to show him first. The marriage certificates were undeniable, official records that even David couldn't dismiss as fabrications. But she told me she'd never been married before. She lied. I spread the other papers across his coffee table. "She's lied about everything, David. Her name, her past, her intentions." David stood up abruptly, pacing to his window. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe these are clerical errors, or someone with the same name." I pulled out the photographs Marcus had obtained from social media accounts and news articles. "Look at the pictures, David. Really look at them." He came back reluctantly, picking up a photo from Trevor Collins' obituary. There was Milani, identified as his widow, Michelle Collins, standing beside his casket in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "This was 3 years ago," I said gently. 6 months before she moved here and met you." David sank back onto his couch, staring at the evidence spread before him. Even if this is true, maybe she had good reasons for not telling me. Maybe she was hurt, traumatized by losing her husband. "David," I leaned forward, needing him to understand. "Trevor Collins died because he couldn't afford treatment. The same treatment I can't afford now because she stole my money. She didn't steal anything. We borrowed it. With no intention of paying it back. Just like she borrowed money from 3 other dying men." I showed him the financial records Marcus had uncovered. Bank statements, insurance claims, property transfers. A clear pattern of Milani marrying men with money, depleting their resources, and disappearing when they became inconvenient. "Look at the timeline, son. Look at how quickly she moves from one man to the next." David was quiet for a long time, studying the documents. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to reconcile the woman he loved with the evidence in front of him. "Maybe she's changed," he said finally. "People can change, Mom. Maybe her past relationships were different, but what we have is real." "Then why did she lie about them?" "I don't know, but I'm going to ask her." I felt a surge of panic. "David, no. Don't tell her I showed you this." "Why not? If she's innocent, she'll have an explanation. And if she's not innocent, what do you think she'll do?" But David was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling her. We're going to settle this right now. I watched helplessly as he dialed Milani's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful through the speaker. Hi, baby. I was just thinking about you. I'm at the florist, and they have the most gorgeous arrangements. Milani, I need to ask you something. Can you come over? Like, right now? There was a pause. Is everything okay? You sound weird. Just come over, please. Of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After he hung up, David turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. I want you to stay, Mom. I want us to talk about this together, as a family. I wanted to refuse, to grab the documents and leave before Milani arrived. I'd seen what happened to men who confronted her with evidence of her past. They died. Sometimes naturally, sometimes with help. But David was my son, and I couldn't abandon him now. Milani arrived exactly 20 minutes later, beautiful as always in a flowing sundress and designer sandals. She kissed David hello, then smiled at me with what looked like genuine warmth. Geneva, what a nice surprise. I haven't seen you in weeks. How are you feeling? I've been better, I said carefully. She settled onto the couch next to David, tucking her legs under her in that graceful way she had. So what's this about? You both look so serious. David glanced at me, then back at Milani. I need to ask you about your past relationships. Milani's smile faltered slightly. What about them? Specifically, about your marriages. The change in Milani's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened, her eyes sharpened, and the warmth in her expression cooled by several degrees. What marriages? David, you know you're my first husband. Actually, I don't think that's true. David picked up the marriage certificate from Trevor Collins and handed it to her. Milani looked at it for a long moment, her face completely blank. Where did you get this? Does it matter where we got it? What matters is whether it's real. Milani set the paper down carefully, her movements controlled and precise. David, I can explain. Please do. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and vulnerable. Trevor was a mistake. I was young and scared, and when he got sick, I panicked. I know I should have told you about him, but I was ashamed. I failed him when he needed me most. It was a good performance. If I hadn't known about the other 3 marriages, I might have believed her myself. What about Robert Martinez? I asked quietly. Milani's head snapped toward me, and for just a moment, I saw something cold and calculating in her green eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I handed David the documents from Phoenix. Another marriage, another sick husband, another mysterious disappearance when the money ran out. Milani stood up abruptly. David, your mother is clearly having some kind of breakdown. This is harassment. And Bradley Thompson? I continued. And Frank Morrison? Stop. Milani's voice was sharp now, all pretense of vulnerability gone. I don't have to listen to this. Yes, you do. David's voice was quiet but firm. Milani, are these documents real? She looked at him for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to decide which approach would work best. Finally, she sighed and sat back down. Okay, yes. I've been married before, several times. But David, you have to understand, I was a different person then. I was lost, confused, making terrible decisions. You married dying men and stole their money. I was trying to survive. Do you have any idea what it's like to be alone in the world? With no family, no support? I did what I had to do. David was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. You told me I was your first love, that you'd never felt this way about anyone. You are, David, what I had with those other men wasn't love. It was desperation, survival. What we have is completely different. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the same pattern. You found a man with money, convinced him to marry you, and now you're spending his family's savings on your wedding. Milani's mask slipped completely then. The sweet, vulnerable woman disappeared, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Your family's savings. David, your mother gave us that money willingly. She said she wanted to contribute to our happiness. I never said that, I protested. Yes, you did. You said family should help each other, that you wanted to be part of our special day. I stared at her in amazement. She was rewriting history right in front of us, creating a completely different version of events where I was the generous mother-in-law instead of the cancer patient whose treatment money had been stolen. That's not what happened, David said slowly. Isn't it? Ask your mother. Ask her to tell you exactly what she said when we asked for the money. I opened my mouth to respond, but Milani continued before I could speak, because what I remember is her saying that she'd rather see the money go to something beautiful and meaningful than waste it on medical bills for someone who's going to die anyway. The lie was so bold, so vicious, that it took my breath away. And the terrible thing was, I could see David wavering, wondering if his memory of that awful day was accurate. David, I said urgently, you know that's not true. You know what really happened. But Milani was already moving toward the door. I don't have to sit here and listen to these accusations. David, when you're ready to discuss this rationally, without your mother poisoning you against me, call me. She paused at the door, looking back at us with something that might have been pity. Geneva, I understand that you're scared and sick, and you're looking for someone to blame. But destroying your son's happiness won't cure your cancer. Then she was gone, leaving David and me alone with the scattered evidence of her crimes. Mom, David said quietly, tell me the truth. Did you really say those things to her? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and good, and realized that Milani had planted just enough doubt to make him question everything. No, I said simply. I never said any of those things, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't entirely sure who to believe anymore, and that terrified me more than the cancer ever had. I almost didn't go to the wedding. For 3 weeks after that confrontation in David's apartment, I heard nothing from either of them. No phone calls, no visits, no angry demands or tearful apologies. Just silence, which somehow felt worse than conflict. I used that time to finish my chemotherapy treatments. Dr. Morrison was cautiously optimistic about my progress, though he warned me that recovery would be slow and uncertain. The reduced treatment protocol had worked better than expected, but I was far from being declared cancer-free. You're stronger than I gave you credit for, he told me during my final infusion. Most people wouldn't have survived what you've been through, physically or emotionally. I thought about that as I sat in the treatment center for the last time, watching the familiar bustle of nurses and patients around me. Rita, my favorite nurse, brought me a small, wrapped gift. What's this? Just a little something for your new chapter, she said with a smile. Inside was a silver bracelet with a single charm, a butterfly. For transformation, Rita explained. You're not the same person who walked in here 3 months ago. She was right. The woman who'd started chemotherapy had been broken, desperate, clinging to the hope that her family would somehow recognize her worth. The woman finishing treatment was something else entirely. Harder, clearer, more determined. I was wearing that bracelet when the wedding invitation arrived. It was delivered by courier, which seemed excessive for something I should have received months ago as part of the original guest list. The envelope was thick, expensive, with David and Milani's names embossed in gold script. Inside, a note in David's handwriting. Mom, I know things have been difficult between us, but you're still my mother. I hope you'll come. Love, David. No mention of Milani, no acknowledgement of the evidence I'd shown him, just a simple, desperate plea from a son who still needed his mother, even if he couldn't admit it. I RSVP'd yes. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and barely recognized myself. 3 months of chemotherapy had left me 40 pounds lighter, my skin pale and fragile looking, but my hair was growing back, soft gray fuzz that I'd decided not to cover with a wig. I wanted people to see what I'd survived. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that had belonged to my mother, paired with the pearl earrings David's father had given me for our 20th anniversary. Classic, dignified, appropriate for a mother of the groom who'd been systematically excluded from every aspect of the wedding planning. I arrived at the venue precisely on time. The Riverside Country Club was exactly the kind of place Milani would choose. Expensive, exclusive, designed to impress. The parking lot was full of luxury cars, and I felt suddenly self-conscious about the modest sedan I'd bought to replace the car I'd sold for treatment money. Inside, the reception hall was transformed into something from a fairy tale. White roses and baby's breath everywhere, crystal chandeliers casting soft light over round tables draped in ivory linens. No expense had been spared, which made sense since most of it had been paid for with my money. I found my assigned table near the back of the room, far from the wedding party and important guests. My table mates were distant relatives and family friends, people who knew me peripherally but wouldn't necessarily notice if I disappeared entirely. Geneva! Aunt Martha, David's great-aunt, reached over to squeeze my hand. You look wonderful, dear. How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. Such a beautiful wedding. Milani certainly has exquisite taste. I smiled and nodded, saving my energy for what was coming. The ceremony itself was held in the club's garden, with David and Milani exchanging vows under an archway of white flowers. David looked handsome in his black tuxedo, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He was having doubts, even if he wouldn't admit them. Milani was radiant, of course. Her dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace that probably cost more than most people's cars. She glowed with happiness as she spoke her vows, promising to love David in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. The irony wasn't lost on me. During the reception, I sat quietly at my table, watching the celebration unfold around me. The food was excellent, the music was perfect, and everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. It was exactly the kind of wedding Milani had dreamed of, the kind that would look perfect in photos and create the right impression. I was nursing my second glass of wine when David approached my table. Mom, he looked nervous, uncertain. Thank you for coming. Of course I came. You're my son. He sat down in the empty chair beside me, loosening his tie slightly. I know things have been complicated lately. That's one way to put it. I want you to know that I've been thinking about what you showed me, about Milani's past. My heart jumped, but I kept my expression neutral. And? She explained everything, about why she didn't tell me, about how she's changed. People make mistakes, Mom. People deserve second chances. I looked at my son, this man who wanted so desperately to believe the best in people that he was willing to ignore obvious danger signs. David, did you verify any of her explanations? Did you contact the families of her previous husbands? I didn't need to. I know her, Mom. I know who she really is. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. David's jaw tightened. I was hoping we could get past this, that you could find a way to accept her, for my sake if nothing else. I accept that you've made your choice. That's not the same thing. Before I could respond, Milani appeared beside our table, resplendent in her wedding dress and glowing with triumph. Geneva, I'm so glad you could make it. You look. She paused, taking in my obvious weight loss and pale complexion. Well, you look like you're surviving. The comment was perfectly crafted, sympathetic on the surface, cruel underneath, designed to remind everyone within hearing distance that I was sick while she was celebrating the happiest day of her life. Thank you, I said simply. It's a beautiful wedding. You must be very proud. I am, we both are. She placed a possessive hand on David's shoulder. It's exactly what we dreamed of. I looked at her carefully. This woman who'd stolen my money, lied about her past, and manipulated my son into marrying her. She was so confident, so certain that she'd won completely. Milani, I said quietly, could I speak with you privately for a moment? David started to object, but Milani cut him off. Of course. We're family now, after all. We walked to a quiet corner of the reception hall, away from the music and laughter. Milani's smile never wavered, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. What did you want to talk about, Geneva? I reached into my purse and pulled out a single photograph. Milani standing beside Frank Morrison's hospital bed, holding his hand while he signed what looked like legal documents. Her smile faltered for just a moment. I know what you are, I said softly. I know what you've done to other families, and I know what you're planning to do to mine. Milani's mask slipped entirely then. The sweet, innocent bride disappeared, replaced by something cold and predatory. You don't know anything, old woman. And even if you did, who would believe you? The bitter, jealous mother-in-law who's upset about her son's happiness? Maybe no one would believe me, but they'd believe Frank Morrison. I pulled out my phone and showed her the contact information I'd obtained through Marcus Webb. He's very much alive, Milani, and very interested in talking to David about his experiences with his former wife, Michelle. For the first time since I'd known her, Milani looked genuinely frightened. What do you want? I want you to disappear. Tonight. Before David figures out what you really are. She laughed, but it sounded forced. I'm not going anywhere. David loves me. We're married now. Are you? Because I'm pretty sure your marriage to Frank Morrison was never legally dissolved, which would make today's ceremony invalid. That wasn't entirely true. Marcus had found evidence that the divorce had been finalized, though Frank had fought it. But Milani didn't know how much I actually knew about her past. You're bluffing. Am I? Would you like to call Frank and ask him yourself? I have his number right here. Milani stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, calculating odds and possibilities. Finally, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You won't win this, Geneva. David chose me over you once already. Even if you convince him to leave me, he'll never forgive you for destroying his marriage. You'll lose your son forever. Maybe, but at least he'll be alive to hate me. I turned and walked away, leaving Milani standing alone in her wedding dress, finally understanding that she wasn't the only one who knew how to play dangerous games. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. I watched David and Milani dance their first dance as husband and wife, watched her laugh and smile and play the perfect bride, but I also watched her eyes, and I saw the fear there, the uncertainty that hadn't been there before. As the evening wound down, I made my goodbyes and prepared to leave. David caught me at the door. Mom, wait! I know tonight was difficult, but I hope we can find a way forward. I looked at my son, so hopeful, so naive, so completely unaware of the danger he was in. I hope so too, David. I really do. But as I drove home that night, I realized I wasn't finished yet. I'd planted seeds of doubt, but that wasn't enough. Milani was too clever, too experienced at manipulation. She'd find a way to explain away my accusations, to turn David against me even more completely. No, if I was going to save my son, I needed to do more than threaten Milani. I needed to make sure she could never hurt anyone again. The phone call came at 3 a.m, 6 weeks after the wedding. Mom? David's voice was shaky, desperate. I need you to come over, please. I'd been expecting this call for weeks, ever since Frank Morrison had agreed to fly in from Denver to meet with David personally. I'd driven to the airport to pick up the elderly man myself, struck by how frail he looked after his ordeal with Milani. She nearly killed me, he'd told me over coffee. If my nephew hadn't gotten suspicious about how sick I was getting, I'd be dead by now. Frank had brought medical records, financial documents, and most importantly, a recording he'd made during one of Milani's visits. His nephew, a police detective, had suggested he start documenting their interactions after noticing irregularities in Frank's medication schedule. The recording was chilling. Milani's voice, sweet and caring on the surface, discussing Frank's will and life insurance policies while he was barely conscious from what she claimed was necessary pain medication. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I'd asked Frank. It won't be easy confronting her again. That woman needs to be stopped, he'd replied firmly. I won't let her do to your son what she tried to do to me. Now, driving through empty streets toward David's apartment, I wondered if I'd made the right choice in orchestrating this confrontation. Part of me had wanted to handle Milani quietly, privately, but David needed to see the truth for himself, from someone who couldn't be dismissed as a jealous mother-in-law. I found David's apartment door unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells. Inside, David was sitting on his couch, staring at papers scattered across his coffee table. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since the wedding. She's gone, he said without looking up. Milani's gone. I sat down beside him, taking in the scene. Bank statements, medical records, the recording device Frank had left behind after their meeting the previous evening. When did she leave? This morning. I woke up and she was just gone. All her things, her clothes, everything, like she was never here. I picked up one of the bank statements, noting the recent withdrawals, large amounts taken over the past week since Frank's visit. David, I'm sorry. He laughed bitterly. Are you? Because part of me thinks you planned all of this. I planned to protect you. That's what mothers do. By destroying my marriage? I set down the bank statement and turned to face him fully. Your marriage was destroyed the moment you said I do to a woman who's made a career out of marrying vulnerable men and taking everything they have. David picked up Frank's medical records, his hands shaking slightly. He almost died because of her. She was poisoning him slowly, increasing his medication doses until his organs started shutting down. And if you'd gotten sick, if you'd had an accident, if you'd become inconvenient in any way, she would have done the same thing to you. I trusted her, David's voice broke. I loved her. I chose her over my own mother. You made a mistake. People make mistakes. This wasn't just a mistake, Mom. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I let her steal your cancer treatment money and convinced myself it was justified because I wanted to believe in the fantasy she was selling. I reached over and took his hand. You're my son. That doesn't change because you made a bad decision. How can you forgive me? How can you even stand to look at me? I thought about the past 6 months, the pain and betrayal and fear. I thought about sitting alone in chemotherapy treatments, selling my possessions to pay for medicine, watching my son choose a manipulative stranger over his dying mother. But I also thought about the phone call at 3 a.m, about David reaching out when his world fell apart because deep down, he knew I would be there. Because love isn't a transaction, I said finally. I didn't love you because you were perfect. I loved you because you were mine. That's what real love looks like, David. It's not conditional on performance or usefulness or convenience. David started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. I held him like I had when he was small, stroking his hair and letting him grieve for the illusion he'd lost. What do I do now? He whispered. Now you learn from this. You become smarter, more careful about who you trust. And you help me make sure she can't do this to anyone else. David pulled back, wiping his eyes. What do you mean? I picked up Frank's recording device. Frank's nephew is a police detective in Denver. He's been building a case against Milani for attempted murder and fraud. With your testimony about the financial theft and evidence from her other victims, we might be able to put her away permanently. She's probably halfway across the country by now. Probably. But she'll surface again eventually. Women like Milani can't help themselves. They find another vulnerable target and start the process over again. David nodded slowly. I want to help. Whatever it takes to stop her. Over the next several weeks, David and I worked with law enforcement to build a comprehensive case against Milani. It turned out that Frank Morrison's nephew had been tracking her movements for months, and with David's cooperation, they were able to freeze several bank accounts she'd opened under false names. The investigation revealed the full scope of Milani's crimes. 6 marriages over 8 years, with a pattern of escalating violence when her victims became suspicious or inconvenient. 2 men had died under mysterious circumstances while married to her. 3 others, like Frank, had survived only because family members intervened. She's a predator, Detective Morrison explained during one of our meetings. A sophisticated one who targets specific types of victims, older men with money and health problems, or younger men who are isolated from their families. David fit the profile, I realized. Successful, somewhat naive, and estranged from his mother. Exactly. She probably started working on that estrangement from the moment she met him. I thought back to those early months of David and Milani's relationship, how she'd gradually positioned herself between us with small comments and suggestions, how she'd encouraged David to see my concerns as possessiveness, my questions as interference. She's very good at what she does, Detective Morrison continued. But she made a mistake when she targeted your family. Most of her victims don't have someone like you fighting for them. 3 months later, Milani was arrested in Miami, where she'd already begun cultivating a relationship with a wealthy widower recovering from heart surgery. The sight of her on the evening news being led away in handcuffs should have felt like victory. Instead, I just felt tired. It's over, David said, watching the broadcast with me from my living room. This part is over, but there's still a lot of healing to do. David had moved back into his old room temporarily while he sorted out his finances and emotions. It was strange having him in the house again, but good strange. We were both different people than we'd been 6 months ago, marked by experiences that had forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, love, and family. Mom, I need to ask you something. I muted the television, giving him my full attention. How do I know if I can trust someone again? How do I know the difference between love and manipulation? It was a question I'd been asking myself, not just about romantic relationships, but about family, friendship, all the ways we make ourselves vulnerable to other people. I think real love makes you more yourself, not less. I said finally. Milani made you doubt your instincts, question your judgment, isolate yourself from people who cared about you. She made you smaller. And real love? Real love encourages you to grow, to be honest, to maintain your other relationships. It doesn't require you to choose between the person you love and everyone else who matters to you. David nodded thoughtfully. I have a lot to learn. We both do. 6 months later, I received a clean bill of health from Dr. Morrison. The cancer was in remission, my strength was returning, and for the first time in a year, I felt like I had a future to plan for. David had started therapy and was slowly rebuilding his confidence. He'd also started volunteering with an organization that helped fraud victims, using his experience to help others recognize the warning signs he'd missed. I can't undo what I did to you, he told me one evening as we worked in the garden together, but maybe I can prevent it from happening to someone else. That's enough, I said. That's more than enough. We'd planted roses that spring, the same variety that had been in my mother's garden when I was a child. They were blooming now. Deep red petals that caught the evening light, beautiful things that required patience and care to flourish. I thought about Milani sometimes, sitting in a prison cell, probably already planning her next manipulation for when she was released. I didn't hate her anymore, which surprised me. She was what she was, a predator who'd found a way to monetize other people's loneliness and vulnerability. But I'd learned something valuable from our encounter. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Strong enough to fight cancer alone, strong enough to investigate a dangerous woman, strong enough to save my son even when he didn't want to be saved. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between being used and being loved. David's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but his return, his genuine remorse and commitment to change, had taught me what forgiveness really meant. It wasn't about forgetting or pretending the hurt hadn't happened. It was about choosing to believe that people could grow, that mistakes didn't have to be permanent, that love was strong enough to survive imperfection. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Not the peace of resolution or justice served, but the deeper peace that comes from knowing you've survived something that was meant to destroy you. I'd found my way back to myself, and that was worth more than any inheritance or wedding dress or fairy tale romance. I was home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.